All right, thanks. I'm only going to talk for about 10 minutes, so this will be fairly brief. But I'm going to ask for something, which is not something that most speakers do. And I'm going to ask for your time to fill out stuff for the registry. Asking for an hour of your time is asking a lot. So I appreciate that. I appreciate this is a big ask. But if you want answers to the questions about 1p36 that many of us have, a registry is one way to get there. So this is what do you need to know and why should you participate? Things we'd all like to know. So my child has this deletion, what does that mean? Will they have seizures? Well, we don't really know. Dr. Scott's research, right, sort of helps us know if you're more likely to have seizures, but it doesn't say yes or no. But this will give you some better numbers about, how many kids, have heart defects and what other things should you look out for. So this is the kind of information we know. We know that somewhere between maybe half and 3/4 of kids have seizures. We know that often it shows up at birth to 2 years, but sometimes it happens when they're teenagers for the first time. And we can know it can be controlled in medications in most, but maybe about a third have hard to control seizures. But those numbers are all pretty vague. And they're pretty vague because most studies are done sort of like this. They look at a room full of people, or they do a survey and they say, how many people have ever had a kid with a seizure? And they take a count of hands and they say, okay, that's half the people in the room, so that's 50% of kids. That's a pretty vague, awful way to do a study. And that's why some studies say 44% and some say 75%. If you look at heart defects, it's kind of the same way. Somewhere between 43 and 75% have it. Sometimes these things called holes in the heart, atrial septal defects or ventricular septal defects, ASDs and VSTs are pretty common. They may or may not require surgery, but all the information is, well, pretty vague and imprecise. And probably the most imprecise information of all is about behavior issues, right? There are lots of questions. There's an article in 2008 that sort of mentions that people with 1p36 have behavioral issues, but clearly I think everybody in this room knows that behavior and sleep issues are super common. But what kinds of issues and when they show up and how they're best treated, no information out there really. But I think the impact on quality of life here is absolutely enormous, and this is an area where more information could be really useful. So how do you get that information? You get it by research. So we'd all agree more research is needed, great. But we're just one of over maybe 10,000 rare diseases. Research is super expensive. And we're an all-volunteer organization with a pretty modest budget, right? Our fundraising comes from selling T-shirts, right? So obviously the funds that we have go really into things like the conference more so than funding big research projects. How can you promote research? So first, the thing you can do is participate in studies because you can't learn stuff without patients, right? Dr. Scott sort of mentioned that earlier. We promote awareness, right? We're wearing our T-shirts. That helps spark, interest and raise some money. And fundraising. Research is very, very expensive, probably from the tens of thousands to the tens of millions of dollars to do big studies. So, as I always say at this point in the talk, if you're wealthy, famous, or politically influential, let Ken know, because that's how rare diseases get attention, right? Somebody famous has the disease, and they bring a lot of attention to it. If you happen to be famous or have a famous cousin who'd be willing to lend their name to our disease, that would be super great. All right, but how can we do it ourselves? We can do it with some professional support and help, and that's where the registry comes in. So we started a registry a few years ago, and that's just a study that follows people over time to see what symptoms come and go, what symptoms develop, and how things change. As I mentioned, a typical study is usually done at one point in time, looking at some group of people, say patients with 1p36 deletion, and they have you essentially fill out a survey. Has your kid ever had a seizure? Do they have a heart defect? And then they count those things up on an Excel spreadsheet and they publish an article. And there's a few articles about 1p36 that are like that. You can get some numbers, but again, you get sort of a big range because honestly, they don't have a big group of people. That type of research is important, but doesn't really help us understand what happens over time. So what registries do is start with a group of patients, again, people with 1p36, follow those same kids over time. So you would answer the same questions in a survey format every year about your child. Over time, this builds up a picture of what 1p36 looks like over a lifespan. What issues occur at what age, and how they affect a child's life. You can join at any time, so you don't have to join when your child is an infant. You can have a 30-year-old and start now, and that's just fine. But the most important thing is to go back and do it every year. So that's really where the time commitment comes in. It's tough to ask people to do that, to go back and say, okay, great, since last year, what's changed? Because over time, things really do change. What might we learn? Well, this morning we had a question, right? My kid has this. Does anybody else kid have this? Has anybody else with 1p36 ever had that? Those are the kind of questions. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and we had the conversation of, well, what's the oldest 1p36 person you've ever met or you've ever heard about? Well, those are questions we all have, right? What does the lifespan of a person with 1p36 look like? Those are important questions, and they're really questions that we don't have great answers to. Why does that information help? I think it helps because it improves quality of life, and it helps you better understand your situation and what your future looks like, and maybe to help your kids understand what their future looks like, and the siblings understand what their future looks like as well. The other advantage here is this is a collection of patients. So if they have your name and information, you can serve as a source for other research studies that are out there. And it's done in a way that protects you. So if somebody contacts our registry and says, I'm a researcher and I want to do a study, they will email you and say, Dr. Jones is doing a study on this. If you're interested, please contact Dr. Jones. So just a little bit about how this works. This registry is run through something called CoRDS, Coordination of Rare Diseases at Sanford. They're a nonprofit medical system in South Dakota. And we have 85 people in our registry currently, so that's great, but that's still not a whole lot bigger than the biggest study out there. The biggest study out there might be like 70 or 80 kids that document sort of the how many kids have seizures, how many kids have heart disease kind of numbers. So we're getting there, but the more people we have, the better information we have, the more precise those estimates of, well, how likely are you to have seizures kind of comes into play. CoRDS is pretty special because this is at no cost to us. It's at no cost to you as a participant. It's at no cost to 1p36 DSA. So they now have registries. If you look, they're partnered with 116 different groups. We're just one of them, 20,000 participants, so we have 85 of those, but from all 50 states and 95 countries. It's fairly easy for you, except for the time commitment. And I appreciate, if you're sitting here and there's really a talk that you're like, I don't really need to go to that, I'm going to go to the registry and fill out all the questions, that would be great. If you want to do it when you get home, that would be great too. But if you can find the time to do this, it would be terrific. You can use the link in the presentation. I'll have them send it out either on the Teams app or put it on the Facebook page. But now they have it all online, so they don't even have to send you a questionnaire. You can just fill out the thing online and just do it while you're sitting here this afternoon if you want. Some important things to know. We're asking for some pretty extensive and sensitive medical information. So they won't share your information with outside researchers unless you give permission to do so, and 1p36 DSA gives permission to do so. So your information is as protected as it can be, given that it's going to be online somewhere, and we all know there's a certain security risk to that inherently. You can remove your data at any time. If you decide you're part of the registry and you decide you don't want to be part of the registry anymore, you can let them know and have it removed. And again, it's at no cost to you, no cost to 1p36 DSA. CoRDS absorbs all the costs associated with the IT, the work, downloading the data, storing the data, and all of that. So what are we really asking? Well, first, to consider if you'd like to participate. And again, you can change your mind at any time. Takes about an hour to complete the questionnaire. And I guess that all depends on how well you have memorized your child's medical information, but I think most of us have given that out so many times that we could probably do it upside down and backwards in our sleep. So you'll probably know all the answers to the questions without having to refer to any of your records. But if you want to be really precise and refer back to documentation, might take a little longer. You'll be asked to update that once a year. I appreciate that this is no small ask, but we hope you'll consider participating anyway, because again, this is about building information for the future. And if you've already enrolled and it's been greater than a year since you've updated your information, now would be a great time to update it. And my thought is how much better information we have if we could get, say, everybody in one of the conferences to fill out all this information, that would be amazing. And you know these conferences have only grown, right? So this looks back at Houston, at Baltimore, and imagine if we had everybody from Charlotte and everybody in the stands, right? That's probably what it looks like if we could get everybody from the Facebook group, you know, 3,000 people. I don't know how many families, but let's say that accounts for 1,000 families. That would be a tremendous amount of information. It would be really useful and really helpful for us to understand much more about 1p36. And I'm happy to take some questions if anybody has any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Callie.